In 1993, 12 children vanished on a camping trip in the Ridgeway Pines forest. Tents left standing. Campfire still warm. No screams. No struggle. No trace. The official report called it a mass abduction. Then, 30 years later, a ranger tracking illegal loggers stumbled across something impossible. 12 backpacks stacked in perfect rows, preserved under a rotting tarp. What they found inside those bags would shatter every assumption about that night, and unleash a horror more twisted than anyone was prepared to confront. Hit subscribe for more strange disappearances, haunted cold cases, and reality-bending investigations. Because every case starts with what's missing, and ends with what was never supposed to be found. Ranger Tim Costas found them on a Tuesday. He'd been tracking illegal logging cuts 3 miles off the Cascade Trail when he saw the tarp. Blue plastic, faded almost white, stretched between 4 Douglas firs like someone had made camp 30 years ago and never left. The corners were tied with yellow rope. Professional knots. The kind they teach Boy Scouts. Under the tarp, 12 backpacks sat in 3 perfect rows. For backpacks, each one facing the same direction. Each one exactly 18 inches apart. Tim walked around them twice before he called it in. The backpacks were small, child-sized, Jansport mostly with a few LL Bean mixed in. Faded colors that might have been bright once. Red, blue, green with yellow zippers. He didn't touch anything. Just stood there with his radio in his hand, looking at the perfect spacing. Dispatch, this is Costas. I need Sheriff Rayner up on Cascade Ridge. GPS coordinates following. The silence between the trees felt wrong. No birds. No wind. Just the sound of his own breathing and the faint crackle of the radio. One of the backpacks had a name tag. Claire in careful block letters, written in black marker on masking tape. Tim had lived in Ridgeway Pines his whole life. He knew that name. Sheriff Naomi Rayner arrived 40 minutes later with Deputy Hall and the crime scene photographer. They parked at the trailhead and hiked up in silence. Naomi stopped 10 feet away from the tarp. Jesus Christ, she said. She was looking at the backpacks the same way Tim had. Walking around the perimeter. Counting. Her hand stayed on her radio but she didn't use it. Deputy Hall started taking pictures. The camera flash looked wrong in the filtered light. Too bright. Too sudden. Sheriff, Hall said. Should we call the state boys? Naomi didn't answer right away. She was crouched next to one of the backpacks. Not touching it. Just looking. These have been here 30 years, she said finally. How do you know? Because I watched them pack these bags. The photographer finished his work. Hall bagged soil samples. Tim strung crime scene tape between the trees, though he wasn't sure why. The tarp had protected everything underneath. No rain had gotten through. No animals had disturbed the arrangement. Naomi radioed for the coroner and a full evidence team. Then she sat on a fallen log and stared at the backpacks. Sheriff, Hall said, you want to tell me what this is about? 12 kids went missing in 1993, Naomi said. Camping trip. They never found the bodies. Never found anything. And you think these are their packs? Naomi nodded toward the one with Claire's name. My brother David's pack is in the second row. Blue Jansport with the broken zipper pull. Hall looked where she pointed. There it was. Blue pack, broken zipper. How can you be sure? Because I helped him pack it. The evidence team arrived 2 hours later. They worked until dark, photographing everything, mapping the positions, collecting the packs one by one. Each bag contained exactly what you'd expect from a child's camping trip. Clothes, toiletries, flashlights with dead batteries, granola bars still in their wrappers. In Claire's pack they found a spiral notebook. Every page covered with drawings of trees. The same tree over and over. Tall and straight with branches that looked like reaching arms. In another pack they found a human tooth. Small. Baby tooth. The root still attached. By the time they finished it was full dark. The crime scene lights made everything look theatrical. Too bright at the center, too black at the edges. Naomi was the last one to leave. She stood under the tarp after the others had gone, looking at the square of bare earth where the backpacks had been. The spacing had been perfect. Intentional. Like someone had used a ruler. She walked back to her truck with her flashlight off. She knew these woods. Had hiked them as a kid with David. Before he disappeared. Before everything changed. The drive back to town took 20 minutes. Main Street was empty except for the light in the sheriff's office and the neon sign at Murphy's Tavern. Naomi parked behind the courthouse and sat in her truck for a few minutes. The radio was quiet. Hall had gone home. The night dispatch was handling things. She thought about David. 12 years old. Gap-toothed smile and constantly dirty fingernails. He'd been so excited about the camping trip. Saved his allowance for new hiking boots. She thought about the other 11 families. The Dennys. The Houstons. The Crafts. All the parents who'd aged 20 years in the first month after the children vanished. Most of them still lived in town. Still shopped at the same grocery store. Still attended the same church. Still waited. Naomi pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She stopped at Denny Margaret, Claire's mother, now 68 and living alone in the same house where she'd waited for her daughter to come home. The phone rang 4 times before Margaret answered. Mrs. Denny? This is Sheriff Rayner. I need you to come down to the station tomorrow morning. We found something. A long pause. The sound of an old woman trying to breathe. Is she coming home? Margaret asked. Naomi looked out at the empty street. At the courthouse clock that read 11:47. At the mountains invisible in the darkness beyond town. I don't know, she said. But we found her backpack. The Ridgeway Pine disappearances filled 4 boxes in the evidence room. Witness statements. Search reports. Photographs of empty tents and cold fire rings. Naomi spread it all across the conference table. 30 years of paperwork. Most of it useless now. Deputy Hall arrived at 8 with coffee and a legal pad. She'd been up late reading the original case files. Talk me through it, Hall said. Naomi pulled out a group photo. 12 children standing in front of a school bus. Summer 1993. All of them smiling. David in the back row with his arm around his friend Marcus Houston. Annual camping trip. Ridgeway Elementary. 2 nights at Cascade Meadows Campground. 13 kids signed up but 1 got sick last minute. Jenny Walsh. Food poisoning. Hall studied the photo. Who were the chaperones? Matthew Lang, science teacher, and Janet Reeves, parent volunteer. Janet died in 2008. Car accident. What about Lang? Still lives here. Has a cabin up on Forest Service Road 47. Naomi found the incident report, typed on an old manual typewriter. Some of the letters slightly raised. Saturday, July 17, 1993. Kids set up camp around 5 p.m. Cooked dinner over the fire. Played games. Normal camping activities. Everyone in their tents by 10. And Sunday morning? Lang woke up at the trailhead parking area. No memory of how he got there. No injuries. Claimed he couldn't remember anything after helping with the campfire Saturday night. Hall made notes. What about the campsite? 13 tents still standing. Sleeping bags still in place. Food still in the bear boxes. Like they all just walked away in the middle of the night. All of them? Including the other chaperone? Janet Reeves was in her tent. Same as the kids. Just gone. Hall flipped through the search reports. Hundreds of volunteers. Search dogs. Helicopters. 3 weeks of intensive searching. They found nothing? Nothing. No tracks. No torn clothing. No signs of struggle. The search dogs couldn't pick up any scents past the immediate campsite area. Theory. Naomi pulled out the FBI behavioral analysis. A thick report with lots of psychological terminology and no useful conclusions. Mass abduction. Organized perpetrator. Someone who knew the area. Someone who had planned extensively. You buy that? I was 19, Naomi said. I wanted someone to blame. Made sense then. And now? Naomi looked at the evidence bags lined up on the table. 12 backpacks. Perfectly preserved. Perfectly arranged. Now I think we missed something. The door opened and Margaret Denny walked in. She looked smaller than Naomi remembered. Frilier, like the 30 years had compressed her. Mrs. Denny, Naomi said. Thank you for coming. Margaret sat down slowly. Her eyes went immediately to the evidence bags. To the one labeled, Claire Denny, Personal Effects. That's her pack, she said. We'll need you to identify the contents. Formally, Hall opened the evidence bag and began laying items on the table. Purple t-shirt with a unicorn on it. Denim shorts. White socks with lace trim. A toothbrush with cartoon characters on the handle. Margaret touched each item with one finger, like she was making sure they were real. She packed this herself, Margaret said. I told her to take more socks, but she said 3 pairs was enough. The spiral notebook came out last. Claire's drawings. Page after page of the same tree. Did Claire like to draw trees? Hall asked. She drew everything. Houses. Animals. People. Never just trees. Margaret flipped through the notebook. Her hands were shaking. This isn't like her other drawings, she said. These are different. Different how? Look at them. Really look. Hall examined the drawings more closely. The tree was always the same. Same proportions. Same branch structure. Same shadowing technique. Like Claire had been copying from life. It's like she was looking at a specific tree, Hall said. For weeks, Margaret said. Every page. Naomi counted the pages. 47 drawings. All identical except for small variations in detail. Some had marks in the bark. Some had what looked like faces in the shadows between branches. Mrs. Denny, Naomi said. I need to ask about the days before the camping trip. Was Claire acting differently? She was excited. Couldn't stop talking about it. But, she kept saying she dreamed about the forest. About a tall man who watched from the trees. She drew him a few times but then erased the drawings. Margaret closed the notebook. I thought it was just imagination. She was always making up stories. Hall was taking notes. Did she mention this tall man to anyone else? I don't know. Maybe the other children. Naomi pulled out the list of missing kids. 12 names. 12 families who'd spent 30 years wondering. Mrs. Denny, we're going to need to contact the other families. Ask them similar questions. Is that going to be a problem? Margaret stood up. She moved like someone carrying invisible weight. They've all been waiting as long as I have, she said. They'll want to know. After Margaret left, Hall and Naomi sat in the conference room looking at the evidence. 12 backpacks. 47 identical drawings. 1 baby tooth. What's bothering you? Hall asked. The arrangement, Naomi said. 3 rows of 4. Perfect spacing. Someone spent time getting it exactly right. Maybe whoever took them was compulsive. Organized. Maybe. Or maybe the backpacks weren't supposed to stay hidden. What do you mean? I mean, maybe someone wanted us to find them. Exactly like this. 30 years later. Hall looked at her notebook. At all the questions they needed to ask. All the families they needed to interview. You think someone's still out there? I think, Naomi said. We're about to find out. Matthew Lang lived in a cabin that smelled like old coffee and unwashed clothes. The windows were covered with aluminum foil. The doors had 3 deadbolts each. Naomi knocked twice before he answered. He looked older than his 62 years. Gray stubble. Hollow cheeks. Eyes that never quite focused on her face. Sheriff Rayner, he said. I wondered when you'd come. The living room was full of newspapers stacked in precise columns. Headlines about missing persons. About unsolved cases. About things that happened in forests. You heard about the backpacks, Naomi said. I heard. Matthew sat in a recliner that faced away from the windows. Doesn't change anything. Might change everything. I already told them what I remembered. 30 years ago. Haven't remembered anything new since. Hall sat on the edge of a wooden chair. Her notebook ready. Matthew watched her with something that might have been fear. Mr. Lang, Hall said. I've read your original statement. You helped with the campfire. Talked to some of the kids about constellations. Then you went to your tent around 10:30. That's right. Next thing you remember, you're waking up in the parking lot. In my sleeping bag. Still in my clothes from the night before. No idea how I got there. Naomi looked around the cabin. At the stacks of newspapers. At the maps on the walls with red circles drawn around various locations. Matthew, she said. What happened to you that night? I don't know. But you have theories. Matthew was quiet for a long time. Outside, wind moved through the trees. The same sound that had been there that night in 1993. I've thought about it every day for 30 years, he said finally. Every single day. And I think someone was in the woods with us. Someone who'd been watching. Planning. Hall made notes. Did you see anyone? Hear anything? I remember helping Claire with her campfire stick. She kept talking about a man she'd seen by the trees. Tall man. Standing very still. Did you see him? I looked where she pointed. Didn't see anything. Told her it was probably just shadows. Matthew got up and walked to one of the foil-covered windows. He peeled back a corner and looked out at the forest. After the FBI finished with me, I started having dreams. Same dream over and over. I'm in my tent and I hear footsteps. Slow footsteps. Circling the camp. In the dream, do you get up? I try to, but I can't move. Like something's holding me down. And then I hear the children's voices. Getting farther away. Like they're walking into the woods. Does anyone come back in the dream? No one ever comes back. Hall closed her notebook. They had what they needed for now. On the drive back to town, Naomi was quiet. The radio crackled with routine calls. A fender bender on Main Street. A noise complaint at the trailer park. Normal problems. Normal Tuesday afternoon problems. But the backpacks changed everything. Perfect rows. Perfect spacing. Someone had been planning this moment for 30 years. The question was whether they were done planning. The call came from Sacramento at 4:17 a.m. Naomi answered on the second ring. Sheriff Rayner? This is Captain Morris, Sacramento County Sheriff. We have a situation here. A woman at one of our shelters. Says she's from your county. Naomi sat up in bed. What kind of situation? She claims to be one of the missing children from 1993. The Ridgeway Pine case. I saw the NCIC alert you posted yesterday about the backpacks. The room felt suddenly cold. What's her name? That's the thing. She says her name is Claire. Claire Denny. But she's not a child anymore. 2 hours later, Naomi was on Highway 5 driving south through morning fog. Deputy Hall rode in the passenger seat with Claire's original missing person file spread across her lap. Born April 12, 1980, Hall read. Would make her 43 now. If she's alive. If she's Claire. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. Captain Morris was waiting in the lobby. Fair warning, he said. She's been through something. Won't say what. But she knows things about your case that weren't in the public record. They followed him down a hallway lined with missing person posters. Some were recent. Some were yellowed with age. All of them showed faces frozen in time. She was found 2 days ago wandering on Stockton Boulevard. Dehydrated. Confused. No ID. The intake worker at the shelter recognized the name when she finally spoke. Morris stopped outside a conference room. Through the window, Naomi could see a woman sitting at a metal table. Mid-40s. Graying hair. Thin in a way that spoke of years without enough food. But her eyes. Even through the glass, Naomi recognized those eyes. That's her, she said. Inside the room, Claire looked up when they entered. Her hands were folded in her lap. Perfectly still. You're the sheriff, she said. It wasn't a question. Sheriff Rayner. This is Deputy Hall. Claire nodded. Your brother was David. He liked astronomy. Wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up. Naomi's breath caught. How do you know that? Because I was there. We all were. Hall opened her notebook. Claire, can you tell us where you've been for the past 30 years? Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. They called it the Grove, deep in the woods, past where the search dogs could smell. Who called it that? The Watcher. He said we were chosen. Said the outside world had forgotten us anyway. What was his real name? Claire shook her head. Names didn't matter there. He was just the Watcher. We were just his children. Naomi leaned forward. Claire, what happened to the others? For the first time, Claire's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. Some of them forgot. After a while, they forgot their real names, forgot their families. They became what he wanted them to become. And the ones who didn't forget? Claire looked directly at Naomi. They went into the ground. The silence in the room was complete except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. Hall made notes. How did you escape? I didn't escape. He let me go. Why? Because I was getting too old. He only kept the young ones, the ones who could still be changed. Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach. Are there others? Others he let go. Claire nodded slowly. 1, maybe 2. But they don't remember the same way I do. They don't want to remember. Where are they? Close. Closer than you think. The drive back to Ridgeway Pines took 3 hours. Claire sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the passing landscape. She didn't speak until they reached the county line. It looks different, she said. Smaller. Lot of changes in 30 years, Naomi said. Not the town. The trees. They used to be taller. Hall turned in her seat. Claire, you mentioned drawings. The Watcher in the Grove. Did you ever draw him? Claire reached into a worn canvas bag she'd been clutching since Sacramento. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. I drew this last week, when the dreams started coming back. She handed the paper to Hall. It showed a tall figure standing among trees. No face, just shadows. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, arms that reached too far. At the bottom, in careful block letters, he's coming back. Coming back where? Naomi asked. Claire looked out at the forest rushing past the car windows. Home, she said. They reached Ridgeway Pines as the sun was setting. Main Street looked the same as it had for decades. Same hardware store, same diner, same courthouse clock that ran 5 minutes slow. But something felt different. People on the sidewalks moved a little faster, glanced over their shoulders, pulled their children a little closer. Word traveled fast in small towns. Naomi drove Claire to the motel at the edge of town. Room 12. Clean sheets. A view of the parking lot and the forest beyond. Will you be okay here tonight? Claire nodded. I've been alone for 30 years. One more night won't hurt. But as Naomi was leaving, Claire called out. Sheriff. Yes. Check the old lumber road. The one that leads to Cascade Ridge. There's something there you need to see. What kind of something? Claire's eyes were distant, like she was seeing something that happened long ago. He marked the trees, she said, to show where the buried ones are. At the station, Hall spread Claire's drawing across the conference table next to the evidence from the backpacks. The spiral notebook with 47 identical trees. The baby tooth. The perfect spacing measurements. Look at this, she said. The trees in Claire's notebook and the figure in her recent drawing shared the same proportions. Same branch structure. Same shadowing technique. She's been drawing the same thing for 30 years, Naomi said. Hall flipped through the notebook again. Not the same thing. The same place. She pointed to details in the margins. Small marks that could have been navigation points. Or landmarks. Or something else entirely. What if these aren't just pictures? What if they're a map? Naomi pulled out a topographic survey of the area around Cascade Ridge. The lumber road Claire mentioned wound through old-growth forest for nearly 6 miles before dead-ending at a clear-cut from the 1980s. Here, she said, pointing to a cluster of elevation marks. This matches the pattern in the notebook. Hall traced the route with her finger. It's not far from where we found the backpacks. Maybe a mile, maybe less. They gathered their equipment as darkness settled over the town. Flashlights, crime scene camera, GPS unit, emergency radio. and something neither of them mentioned but both felt necessary: their service weapons. The lumber road was overgrown with blackberry vines and salmonberry bushes. Branches scraped against the sides of Naomi's truck as they drove deeper into the forest. After 20 minutes, the road became impassable. They continued on foot. The forest was different here, older. The trees stood farther apart, creating spaces where moonlight filtered through in silver columns. Their footsteps seemed too loud on the carpeted ground. Hall stopped first. "Do you hear that?" Naomi listened. Wind through branches, the distant call of an owl, and something else, something rhythmic and soft. Water. Maybe. They followed the sound through a grove of ancient cedars. The trees here were massive, old-growth giants that had survived logging operations and forest fires. Some were scarred with marks that didn't look natural. Carved marks. Symbols cut deep into the bark decades ago but still visible. "Tamsin," Naomi said, "look at these trees." Hall approached one of the marked cedars with her flashlight. The symbol was simple but deliberate. A circle with 3 lines extending down like roots, or like a tree. "There's another one over here," Hall called out. "And another." They counted 12 marked trees arranged in a rough circle around a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, the ground was different. Sunken slightly, covered with moss but lacking the natural undulation of forest floor. Naomi knelt and brushed away the surface vegetation. Beneath was dark soil that felt wrong under her fingers. Too soft, too rich. "This is it," she said. "This is where they're buried." Hall was examining another marked tree when she called out sharply, "Sheriff, you need to see this." The tree Hall had found was different from the others. Larger, more elaborate carving. And at its base, something that made Naomi's blood go cold. A fresh offering. Wildflowers arranged in a careful pattern. A small carved figure made from pine wood. And a note written on birch bark in the same careful block letters from Claire's drawing. "The children are coming home." Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with the case files spread in front of her and Claire's drawings tacked to the wall above. The marked trees, the burial ground, the fresh offerings. Someone had been maintaining that site. Someone who knew where the children were buried. Someone who was still out there. At 6 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. "Sheriff Rayner? Speaking. This is Dr. Patricia Hayes at Fairview Psychiatric Hospital. I saw the news report about the missing children case. About Claire Denny." Naomi sat up straighter. "What about her?" "I have a patient. Has been here for 15 years. Admitted under the name Caleb Knox. But his intake records. There are discrepancies." "What kind of discrepancies?" "No family history before age 8. No school records. No medical records. And he matches the physical description of one of your missing children. Caleb Houston." Naomi closed her eyes. "Another one. Can I see him?" "That's why I'm calling. After the news broke yesterday, he's been asking for you. By name." Fairview Psychiatric Hospital was 2 hours south of Ridgeway Pines. A sprawling complex of brick buildings surrounded by manicured lawns and walking paths designed to look peaceful. Dr. Hayes met Naomi in the lobby. Mid-50s, gray hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Caleb is unusual," she explained as they walked through the corridors. "High-functioning in many ways. He's completed his GED. Reads voraciously. But he has episodes. Periods where he becomes fixated on drawing." "Drawing what?" "Trees. Always trees. The same tree, actually. Sometimes he'll fill 50 pages in a single day with the exact same drawing." They stopped outside a common room where patients were engaged in various activities. Dr. Hayes pointed to a man sitting alone by the window. Naomi recognized him immediately. He had the same eyes as the boy in the 1993 school photo. The same jawline. But his hair was gray at the temples and his face carried lines that spoke of years of medication and institutionalized living. "Caleb," Dr. Hayes said gently, "this is Sheriff Rayner." He looked up from the notebook he was drawing in. His eyes met Naomi's and something shifted in his expression. "You look like David," he said. Same eyes. Naomi sat down across from him. You remember David? I remember all of them. That's the problem. Caleb closed his notebook and set it aside. His movements were careful, practiced, like someone who'd learned to keep his emotions contained. Are you here to take me back? He asked. Back where? To the Grove. Naomi felt her pulse quicken. Tell me about the Grove, Caleb. He was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the hospital grounds. It wasn't a place, he said finally. It was a way of thinking. He taught us that memory was pain, that forgetting was freedom. Who taught you that? The Watcher. He said our families had given up on us, said the search had stopped, said we could choose to stay children forever in his care or try to return to a world that no longer wanted us. But you didn't forget. Caleb shook his head. Neither did Claire. That's why he let us go eventually. We were broken pieces that wouldn't fit. What about the others? For the first time, Caleb's composure cracked. His hands began to tremble. Some of them learned to forget. They became his perfect children. Obedient, quiet, empty. He looked directly at Naomi. He kept them. Are they still alive? I don't know. When I left in 2008, there were still 3 who hadn't remembered their real names. 3 who believed they belonged there. Where is the Grove, Caleb? He opened his notebook and flipped to a page near the back. The drawing was different from the others. More detailed. It showed a clearing surrounded by trees, with small structures scattered throughout. Here, he said, pointing to marks on the drawing that looked like coordinates. But it won't look the same now. He moves things, changes things, makes sure no one can find the same place twice. Naomi studied the drawing. Caleb, have you had any contact with him since you left? No contact. But, he hesitated. I know when he's close. I can feel it, like a shadow at the edge of my vision. Do you feel it now? Caleb nodded slowly. Since yesterday, since Claire came forward. He knows we're talking. That evening, Naomi called a meeting with Hall and the state investigators who'd been assigned to the case. They gathered in the conference room at the station with all the evidence spread across multiple tables. 2 survivors so far, Naomi said. Both described the same person, the Watcher. Both say he's still out there with children who've been conditioned to forget their identities. Agent Morrison, the lead state investigator, studied the drawings. Any forensic evidence from the burial site? Soil samples are at the lab. Should have results tomorrow. But there's something else. Naomi pulled out photos from that morning's return visit to the marked trees. The offerings were gone. Someone collected them during the night. Hall leaned forward. So we know he's still active in the area. More than active. He's responding to our investigation. Watching us. Agent Morrison made notes. What about the psychiatric hospital records? Anything useful there? Dr. Hayes is sending over everything they have on Caleb's admission. But there's a pattern emerging. Claire was found in Sacramento. Caleb ended up in a hospital 2 hours south. Both locations are roughly the same distance from Ridgeway Pines. Meaning he has a range, a territory he operates in, and we're at the center of it. The meeting broke up after midnight. As the others left, Hall lingered behind. Sheriff, she said, there's something I didn't mention in the meeting. What? When we were at the burial site last night, I found something else. Something I wanted to have analyzed before I said anything. Hall pulled an evidence bag from her jacket. Inside was a small wooden carving, roughly shaped like a human figure but with exaggerated proportions. Too tall, too thin. It was tucked under one of the root systems, like it had been there for years. Naomi examined the carving through the plastic. The wood was weathered but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. This hadn't been carved by an adult. Child-made. That's what I'm thinking. And if I'm right, then the children made these themselves, as offerings to him. Hall nodded grimly, which means they weren't just victims. At least some of them became willing participants. 3 days after finding the burial site, the forensics report came back from the state lab. The soil samples contained traces of human remains, multiple individuals, some dating back decades. But the most disturbing finding was in the chemical analysis. The soil showed evidence of lime treatment. Someone had been working to preserve the site, to maintain it. Naomi sat in her office reading the report when Margaret Denny called. "Sheriff? I found something. Something I should have given you 30 years ago." An hour later, Margaret sat across from Naomi's desk with a small wooden box in her lap. She handled it like it might break. "After Claire disappeared, I couldn't bear to pack up her room. Everything stayed exactly the same for almost 10 years. Then I found this hidden under her mattress." Margaret opened the box. Inside were things that didn't belong to a 12-year-old girl, or shouldn't have. Photographs of other children Naomi didn't recognize. A hand-drawn map of forest trails, and a diary with entries that made Naomi's skin crawl. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the diary. Margaret nodded, tears already forming in her eyes. The first entry was dated 2 weeks before the camping trip. "He visited again last night. Stood outside my window like before. He says I'm special. Says I can help him with the others." Naomi flipped through more entries, each one more disturbing than the last. "The other children at school don't understand. They think parents love them forever. He showed me the truth. Parents forget. Parents move on. But he never forgets his children. I drew the tree again today. The special tree where we'll all be together. I can't wait to show David and Marcus and the others. He says I'm ready now. Says I can help him collect them." The final entry was dated the night before the camping trip. "Tomorrow we go into the woods. Tomorrow I become his helper. The others don't know yet, but they will understand. We'll all be together forever in the grove." Naomi closed the diary, her hands shaking. "Mrs. Denny," she said carefully, "did Claire ever mention dreams? Or visits? Or seeing someone?" Margaret nodded. "All that spring, she kept talking about a tall man in the woods. I thought it was just imagination. She'd always been creative. Did she ever act differently? Withdrawn? Secretive? The opposite. She was excited, happier than I'd ever seen her. Like she had a wonderful secret she couldn't wait to share." After Margaret left, Naomi called Hall and Agent Morrison back to the station. She spread Claire's diary entries across the conference table alongside the other evidence. "Claire wasn't just a victim," she said. "She was recruited, groomed." Hall studied the photographs from the box. "Do we know who these other children are?" "I ran them through missing persons databases. 3 matches so far. All disappeared from other counties over a span of 15 years. All around the same age." Agent Morrison was reading the diary entries. "This suggests he'd been watching the Ridgway children for months before the camping trip, which means he knew their routines, their families, their vulnerabilities. And he chose Claire as his inside person." Naomi nodded. She helped him take the others. The weight of that realization settled over them like a thick fog. One of the missing children had been complicit in their own disappearance. That afternoon, Naomi drove back to the motel to show Claire her own diary. She found the room empty. The bed was made. Claire's few belongings were gone. On the nightstand was a note written in the same careful block letters. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Some truths are too heavy for the living to carry. He's calling us home now. All of us who remember. Don't follow. Don't try to save us. We were never meant to be saved. The children are coming home." Naomi radioed for backup and began searching the area around the motel. Claire's trail led into the forest behind the building, but after 50 yards, it simply disappeared. No broken branches, no footprints, as if she'd vanished into the trees themselves. That night, Caleb Knox disappeared from Fairview Psychiatric Hospital. The security cameras showed him walking calmly out of his room at 2:17 a.m. He passed 3 nurse stations unnoticed, exited through an emergency door that should have been alarmed, and walked into the darkness. No one saw him leave. No one remembered him passing by. By morning, a search of his room revealed that he'd been drawing obsessively for days. His notebook was filled with maps, detailed directions through forest trails that led back to Ridgeway Pines. On the final page, a message in his careful handwriting. The family is gathering. The lost children are coming home. The watcher in the grove calls to those who remember. We never left the woods. The woods never left us. Naomi assembled a team at dawn. Hall, Agent Morrison, and 4 state officers with woodland training. They followed Caleb's maps into the deepest part of the forest, beyond where any official trails led. The trees here were ancient, old-growth giants that predated the logging operations. Some were marked with the same symbols they'd found at the burial site. Others bore newer marks, fresh cuts in the bark that still wept sap. They followed the marked trees deeper into the wilderness. The forest grew quiet around them. No birds, no small animals, just the sound of their own breathing and the soft crunch of needles underfoot. After 2 hours of hiking, they found the first structure. It was built into the base of a massive cedar. Walls of fitted stone and weathered wood. A single door made from pine planks. No windows. Agent Morrison approached with his weapon drawn. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale and cool. The walls were covered with children's drawings. Hundreds of them, all showing the same tall figure standing among trees. All signed with names that weren't names. Dove, Silence, Faithful, Chosen. But mixed among them were drawings that showed real names crossed out and replaced with the new ones. David became obedient. Marcus became still. Janet Reeves became mother. In the center of the room was a circle of small chairs, child-sized, arranged around a larger chair carved from a single piece of oak. Hall found a ledger on a shelf near the door, names and dates going back 40 years, children from dozens of counties. Some marked as forgotten, meaning they'd successfully been converted. Others marked as released, like Claire and Caleb. A few were marked simply as rest. "Look at this," Morrison called from the back of the structure. Behind the main room was a smaller space. Storage area, filled with children's belongings. Backpacks, clothing, toys, all carefully preserved and labeled with the fake names. But the newest additions made Naomi's stomach turn. Claire's canvas bag, Caleb's hospital clothes, and a pile of items that didn't belong to any of the known victims. Recent items, children's clothing from this decade, this year. "He's still taking them," she whispered. They continued deeper into the grove. More structures appeared among the trees. Sleeping quarters built into root systems. Storage areas carved into hillsides. A central gathering space with benches arranged in concentric circles around a fire pit. And in the very center of the grove, the tree from all the drawings. It was massive, ancient beyond measure. Its trunk was easily 15 feet in diameter, its canopy disappearing into the forest ceiling above. Carved into its bark were hundreds of names. Real names, all crossed out and replaced with the chosen names beneath. At the base of the tree they found them. Claire and Caleb sat motionless in the roots, their eyes open but vacant, breathing but not present, like they were sleeping with their eyes open. "Claire," Naomi said, approaching slowly. "Claire, can you hear me?" No response. Hall tried Caleb. "Caleb, we're here to help you." Nothing. Morrison was examining the tree more closely. "Sheriff, look at this." Near the base of the trunk, hidden behind the seated figures, was an opening. A hollow in the tree large enough for a person to enter. From inside came the sound of breathing. Multiple people breathing in perfect unison. Naomi drew her weapon and approached the opening. Inside the hollow tree was a circular chamber lit by candles. 7 figures sat cross-legged on the floor. Children and adults alike. All breathing together. All staring at nothing. And standing behind them, so tall he had to stoop in the enclosed space, was the Watcher. He looked exactly like the drawings. Too tall, too thin, arms that reached too far. But his face was human. Ordinary. The kind of face you'd forget minutes after seeing it. "Sheriff Rayner," he said in a voice like wind through leaves. "You've come to collect the lost children." Naomi kept her weapon trained on him. "Step away from them. They don't want to be collected." They've chosen to stay. They've chosen to forget. Let them speak for themselves. The Watcher smiled. It was the most disturbing expression Naomi had ever seen. They've forgotten how to speak for themselves. They've forgotten everything but peace. One of the seated figures raised her head. It was a girl, maybe 16 now, but with the blank expression of someone much younger. "Mother," she said to the Watcher, "are we going home now?" "Yes, faithful. We're all going home." The Watcher reached into his coat and pulled out a small bottle filled with dark liquid. "The final forgetting," he said. "The last memory they need to release." Naomi realized what was about to happen. Everyone out. Now. But as they moved to exit the tree, the opening sealed itself. The wood groaned and shifted, trapping them inside the hollow chamber. "You can't save them," the Watcher said calmly. "They don't want to be saved. They want to be free from the pain of remembering." Naomi kept her weapon steady. "The backpacks. Why leave them now? Why 30 years? The Watcher's smile widened. Because 30 years was how long it took to perfect the process. To reach the final ceremony. The backpacks were an invitation. For Claire. For Caleb. For all who escaped my care to return home. You wanted us to find them. I wanted my lost children to find them. The arrangement, the preservation, the perfect spacing, it was a signal only they would understand. A call to the final gathering. His voice grew softer. 73 souls wait to be preserved. But the ceremony required witnesses. It required those who remember to choose forgetting. He uncapped the bottle. "But I can offer you the same peace. You can forget about your brother. Forget about the children you failed to protect. Forget about the guilt that brought you here." Naomi felt something shift in her mind. A temptation to let go. To stop carrying the weight of 30 years of questions. "No," she said. The Watcher tilted his head. "Think about it, Sheriff. What has remembering ever given you but pain?" Around the chamber, the seated figures began to sway slightly. Their breathing grew deeper. "They're happy," the Watcher continued. "They're safe. They're loved unconditionally. Isn't that what every child wants?" Naomi looked at the faces around her. Peaceful. Serene. Empty. "They're not happy," she said. "They're gone." The Watcher raised the bottle toward the lips of the nearest child. A boy who couldn't have been more than 20, but had the vacant stare of someone who'd stopped aging emotionally years ago. "Stop," Naomi said. "Why? So they can return to a world that's forgotten them? So they can grow old and die alone like you will?" The words hit harder than they should have. Naomi felt her resolve waver. "I've given them eternal childhood," the Watcher continued. "Eternal safety. No one will ever hurt them again. No one will ever leave them." "You left them," Naomi said. "You left Claire and Caleb. I released them when they proved incapable of true peace. But these others," he gestured to the seated figures. "These others have found perfect contentment." The bottle was almost to the boy's lips when Hall's voice cut through the chamber. "Sheriff! The tree!" Naomi looked around and realized the hollow wasn't natural. The walls showed tool marks. This chamber had been carved out over decades. Slowly, carefully, and it was still being carved. The Watcher wasn't just keeping the children here. He was preparing them for something final. "What happens after the forgetting?" Naomi asked. The Watcher paused. "They become part of the grove forever. Their bodies nourish the tree. Their spirits remain as children always. You're going to kill them. I'm going to preserve them. At the moment of perfect peace." Naomi understood now. The burial site, the preservation efforts. He'd been doing this for decades. Taking children, conditioning them to forget, then preserving them before they could remember or grow old. "How many?" she asked. 73 so far. All of them perfect. All of them eternal. The boy's lips parted to accept the liquid. Naomi lunged forward, knocking the bottle from the Watcher's hand. It shattered against the wooden wall, spilling its contents onto the chamber floor. The effect was immediate. The seated figures began to stir. Their breathing became irregular. Their vacant stares flickered with something that might have been recognition. "You've ruined it," the Watcher said. His voice lost its hypnotic quality. Now it just sounded tired. It took years to bring them to perfect peace. The boy blinked and looked around the chamber as if seeing it for the first time. Where? He began, then stopped. His voice was hoarse from disuse. Where am I? You're safe, Naomi said. You're going home. But the watcher wasn't finished. He reached for another bottle hidden in his coat. Morrison fired once. The shot echoed in the confined space like thunder. The watcher fell backward against the chamber wall. But instead of collapsing, he seemed to melt into the wood itself. His form became indistinct, shadowy. You can't kill what was never fully alive, he whispered from within the tree. And you can't save what doesn't want to be saved. The chamber began to shake. The walls groaned and cracked. Everyone out, Morrison shouted. But the opening had sealed completely. They were trapped in a tree that was collapsing around them. The boy who'd been about to drink the liquid stood on unsteady legs. I know a way, he said in that unused voice. I've been watching him for years. There's another way out. He led them to what looked like a solid wall but pressed against it in a specific pattern. A section of the wood slid away, revealing a narrow tunnel that led down into the earth. They crawled through the tunnel one by one. Behind them, the chamber collapsed with a sound like screaming wood. They emerged from the tunnel 50 yards away from the tree. Above ground, the massive cedar was splitting apart. Decades of careful carving had weakened it beyond repair. As it fell, the sound echoed through the forest like the death cry of something ancient and terrible. The 7 children they'd rescued sat in the clearing, blinking in the filtered sunlight like people waking from a long dream. Some remembered their names. Others remembered only fragments. But they were alive. They were free. They were beginning to remember. Claire and Caleb remained motionless at the base of the fallen tree. But when Naomi approached them, their eyes tracked her movement. It's over, she told them. He's gone. Claire's lips moved almost imperceptibly. David is gone, Claire. But you're not. You survived. Slowly, like someone learning to move again, Claire reached up and touched Naomi's face. You look like him, she whispered. You have his eyes. 6 months later, Naomi stood in the cemetery outside Ridgeway Pines. The headstone was simple granite with David's name and dates. Below that, a line he'd written in a school essay when he was 10. The stars are always there, even when we can't see them. Claire approached from the parking area. She moved differently now. Still careful, still healing, but present in a way she hadn't been before. How are you doing? Naomi asked. Better. Therapy helps. Remembering helps. Claire placed a small wooden carving on David's grave. A tree, but not the terrible tree from the grove. This one had branches that reached toward light instead of grasping in darkness. I carved this myself, she said. Dr. Martinez says making new things helps replace the old images. Of the 7 children they'd rescued from the grove, 5 had remembered enough of their original identities to be reunited with families. 2 had chosen to remain in group care, their memories too fractured to rebuild completely. Caleb had returned to the psychiatric hospital, but as a voluntary patient working with doctors to help other trauma survivors. His drawings now showed open skies instead of endless trees. Matthew Lang had emerged from his cabin for the first time in years to attend David's memorial service. He spoke about the importance of bearing witness, even when the truth was too painful to carry alone. The investigation had uncovered evidence of the Watcher's activities spanning 5 decades. 73 confirmed victims. Multiple burial sites throughout the Pacific Northwest. A network of abandoned structures hidden deep in national forests. But no trace of the man himself. The body in the tree had decomposed too rapidly for identification. Some of the forensics team theorized that he'd been using the preserved chamber as a form of crude mummification. Others suggested he'd been dead for years and the children had been maintaining some kind of collective delusion. Naomi had stopped trying to understand the how. The important thing was that it was over. Sheriff, Claire said, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think he was right? About forgetting being easier than remembering? Naomi looked out at the forest beyond the cemetery. The same trees that had hidden the grove. The same trees where David had disappeared 30 years ago. Sometimes, she said, but forgetting doesn't heal anything. It just delays the pain. Claire nodded. That's what I thought. As they walked back toward town, Claire stopped and pulled something from her pocket. A photograph. The old school picture from 1993. 12 children smiling at the camera. I want to remember all of them, she said. Not just how they ended, but how they were before, when they were whole. Naomi looked at her brother's face in the photograph. 12 years old forever. Gap-toothed grin and eyes full of dreams about the stars. Tell me about them, she said. Tell me what you remember. And as they walked through the quiet streets of Ridgeway Pines, Claire began to speak. She told stories about Marcus Houston's terrible jokes and Jenny Walsh's collection of Smooth River rocks. About David Rayner's astronomy books and Janet Reeves' homemade cookies. She spoke their names, their real names, and in speaking them, kept them alive in the only way that mattered. The forest watched them go. Silent now. Peace. The terrible tree had fallen, but the others remained. Witness to what had been lost and what had been found. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the forgetting, but the remembering. Not the silence, but the speaking of names. The children had come home. Not to the grove, but to memory. Not to the watcher, but to the people who had never stopped looking for them. And in the quiet town of Ridgeway Pines, their stories would be told for generations. A reminder that some truths are too important to bury, no matter how much they hurt to carry. The stars were always there, even when you couldn't see them. Just like love, just like memory, just like the children who never really disappeared, but were only waiting to be found.